Hello, I'm Hazem Seeker. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, some of the world's biggest technology names out with earnings, but there's a face-off with regulators in what's being called a tech lash. Also this week, a golden era. That's how the UK and China want to see their partnership, but those golden fruits may prove difficult to harvest with Brexit in the way. Plus,
I'm Wayne Hay reporting from southern Thailand, where we'll tell you about an ambitious coast-to-coast project that could have a major impact on shipping and security.
Now, some of the world's biggest technology names posted earnings over the past few days. Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, and Microsoft produced quarterly revenues of around $100 billion altogether, and that's likely to continue. Back in 2013, The Economist predicted a looming tech clash. In 2018, internet giants are under the microscope over the way they do business. New data privacy rules will go into effect in the EU in May. Germany is already investigating how Facebook uses the data from millions of its users. The US is looking at whether Apple broke laws with software updates which slowed older iPhones. And Congress is holding more hearings on the use of social media platforms to allegedly disrupt US elections. Consumers, too, are asking if things like smartphones designed to keep us online for longer are just making companies richer at the expense of children's mental health. So joining us now from New York is Daniel Ives, Chief Strategy Officer and Head of Technology Research at GBH Insights. Thanks very much for being with us. So let me ask you, there has been something of a backlash, though, against many of these tech giants, a tech lash, if you will, as we've been saying. There's the whole issue of Facebook and all of the fake news that was allowed on their platform, and they haven't been doing enough on that. There's issues of privacy as well of users and what their information is being used for, and so on. What sort of effect is that going to have on the industry, and what are they doing to address that? Are they doing enough to address it?
Yeah, it's had a big effect. I mean, if you look since the Russia meddling, fake news, it's really now you're seeing a lot more heat on Facebook, on Twitter, on Alphabet, not just here in Capitol Hill, but also in the EU and abroad. And they've really had to change a lot of their, especially for Facebook, the news feed. That's been a big moneymaker from a monetization perspective. So we're talking a few billion that was potentially a risk, as they've made the move now for users to see less, we'll call it advertising, and more from friends and family. They're definitely in the crosshairs of regulators. And I think you're seeing Twitter as well as Alphabet and YouTube, they're going to have to be a lot more strict and a lot more focused on some of the content that's coming through, as we're seeing the double-edged sword of social media, the positives but also the negatives, and they're right front and center in terms of the crosshairs of Capitol Hill.
You mentioned there what authorities in Europe have been doing. We saw European regulators not being shy about pushing back against tech giants. We saw that with Apple and its tax payments, the antitrust fine against Uber, what happens with Google as well, and some of their business practices. Do you think that the tide is turning now in terms of greater oversight of these companies, and are we going to see more of that in the US as well?
Yeah, I mean, that continued sort of boxing match between Silicon Valley and the EU is getting, I would say it's getting more intense. You know, part of it, just like you said, they focused on Apple. You know, you've seen them focused originally on Microsoft. But now you are seeing stricter potential for regulatory oversight. I think part of it is that these companies need to play nice in the sandbox, as I'll call it. They need to sort of have olive branches out to the EU. I think you've seen that with Facebook in terms of some of their changes to the tax code and what they've done in Ireland. And I think you're going to see more of that as they're going to have to sort of outreach more of the EU, as it looks like, you know, they are looking to get a lot more stricter, especially on the privacy stuff. And that's why, you're seeing a lot of these social media companies, Facebook, Twitter, Alphabet in particular, on YouTube, trying to be more proactive now in terms of privacy content, because they know coming down the pike there's more potentially oversight coming, and that would be a major issue for the business model.
You talked there about these companies needing to play nice in the sandbox, as it were. What does that look like to you? Should there be more transparency, more data sharing, perhaps, and less of the kind of what we're seeing of bullying competitors on search results and news feeds and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, look, the reality is that these companies at this point basically own, I'll call it the consumer kingdom. You could call it streaming on Netflix. When you look at social media to advertising, it is really Facebook, Google, and you could say Twitter a little further down the road that own it. So I don't think their core business models change, but I do believe transparency. I think a lot more oversight around content. I mean, Facebook said they're going to stop crypto advertising and Bitcoin advertising. That's an example of just like, they're like, look, if this could be an issue, we're going to take it off. Now, look, those in the near term affect the model, right? You're talking billions of dollars potentially at risk, but they need to do it because the last thing they could do right here is have another, we'll call it fake news, Russia meddling situation happen, which would really put more heat in the kitchen for them. So they're going to be a lot more proactive. And look, they're going to have to spend what's called combined another 50, 100 million on security, on content, on people, on regulatory potential issues in order to make sure that these things don't affect their business model. They need to put guardrails around them, make sure they're being more proactive than reactive.
Interesting times in the tech industry. We'll be keeping a close eye on what does happen. Thanks very much, Daniel Ives. In Germany, opposition MPs are demanding answers from the government about a scandal involving well-known car makers and diesel fume tests. A research group funded by BMW, Daimler, and Volkswagen reportedly forced volunteers and monkeys to inhale toxic exhaust gases. The VW suspended one of its senior executives after the public outcry over the secret tests. Dominic Kane has more from Berlin.
This unfolding scandal involving three of Germany's largest car manufacturers, Daimler, BMW and Volkswagen, has profound implications not just for the motor industry but also the closeness of the relationship between the German government and the motor manufacturers. Let's remember the importance of the German car industry, the automotive industry, to the German economy. Very important, generates a great deal of revenue every year, creates many jobs in this country, which explains why the successive governments have sought to have a close relationship. The point also to make here is the motor manufacturers have tried to distance themselves from the tests that have taken place, have deprecated them, condemned them, said that could never happen again. But underlying all of this, as I say, is the perception of what is happening in the motor industry. Let's be clear, ethics certainly raised its head regarding the Dieselgate scandal, the defeat devices that were created to allow the cars artificially to pass emissions tests. Well, those have not faded from people's minds. Now the question people are asking is, well, how far does this idea of trying to get around rules, doing things that might not be ethical, how far does that extend? And also there are some environmental lobbies saying, well, we think that the government, successive governments, are too closely aligned with car firms and they want some kind of breakup of that, some kind of distancing to go ahead.
Still to come on Counting the Cost.
It's not only the financial markets that are booming. I'm Rob McBride at the biggest market in traditional Chinese medicine that's going through the roof.
Now, Myanmar's economic prospects with the West are at risk after mounting international criticism over its handling of the Rohingya crisis. Scott Heidler reports from Yangon.
As the bustle of Yangon City winds down at the end of the day, people stream to the riverside to commute, to feed the seagulls, and to soak in the last bit of light before sunset. And when the sun rises and a new day starts, a reminder has arrived overnight. Another cargo ship from Myanmar's main trading partner, China. Also a reminder of the dependence on its huge neighbor to the north. Something leaders here hoped would lessen when economic sanctions began to soften 8 years ago. But with mounting international criticism and pressure over the Rohingya crisis, the nation seems to be turning its focus away from new partners in the West.
I think given the justified anger on the part of the international community and the UN, instead of handling that criticism and dealing with the crisis in Rakhine in a professional, political and moral manner, the government just decided we'll just go back to the Chinese.
This new factory on the outskirts of Yangon supplies Myanmar rubber to tire manufacturers up in China. It's about 70% of their business. They want to expand to the West. But this deepening rift between Western nations and the government here might force companies like this and the nation to remain reliant on trade with China.
Myanmar drew harsh comments from the U.S. last week when it announced the government would buy 6 advanced Su-30 fighter jets from Russia. Kin Zaw-win was a political prisoner during military rule. He says the timing of the fighter deal and closer military ties with Russia are related to the Rohingya crisis.
After what happened in Rakhine and the discussions at UN Security Council, China and Russia flatly said that they would support Myanmar. So this is something that the Myanmar military especially knows that it can count on.
Analyst David Matheson feels that even though the two nations are providing for Myanmar now investments and defense assistance, there's a long-term problem.
They do need Western donors because the Chinese and the Russians aren't going to provide health and education initiatives. They want to sell weapons and they want to extract natural resources.
Right now, most of the people of Myanmar are not aware of any negative impact that the Rohingya crisis might bring. But some think that there will be a cost if there's further distancing from the international community, and that could impede the progress of reform after years of isolation.
Now, Panama has its famous canal. The Suez Canal cuts through Egypt, and now there's a plan to resurrect a 400-year-old sea link in the south of Thailand. The waterway would link the Indian Ocean and Andaman Sea with the Gulf of Thailand and the South China Sea. Wayne Hay traveled to Si Kiao, home to a coastal community.
During the wet season, Thailand's Andaman coast is often dark and moody. Tourists go home, leaving local fishermen to ply their trade in relative peace. But life could become a lot busier if a proposed shipping canal cuts through here. Some welcome the prospect of investment, while others doubt their lives would change for the better.
When it comes to mega projects, it's never the people who benefit. It's only the rich people, big people from Bangkok, who'll get more rich from it. We never get anything, and the government never helps.
At the moment, ships sailing between Europe and China, for example, travel through the dangerous and congested Malacca Strait, often stopping in Singapore to refuel or unload before continuing. The Thai Canal would cut more than 1,000 kilometres off the journey, but could drastically cut into Singapore's shipping trade. The backers of this canal proposal have many problems to overcome, not least of which is the location. Between here and the Malaysian border, there is a separatist movement, with armed Muslim groups fighting for independence from Thailand in the 3 southernmost provinces. If the canal goes through here, it could create something of a border and therefore embolden their claim. Because of the violence in the south, Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha says he's reluctant about effectively cutting the country in two. Supporters of the plan, which include some Thai business leaders and retired generals, believe they can convince the Prime Minister to at least agree to a feasibility study.
He has to come to an understanding that this is the project that will stimulate our economy faster than any other projects that we have right now.
The Canal Group says it has private sector support from China to help pay the estimated price tag of $30 billion. But it really needs Chinese government backing if it's to tap into Beijing's One Belt, One Road economic and trade initiative to link East and West. So far, there's no sign of Chinese government money. In the proposed canal zone, there's already concern about the potential impact on tourism, the environment and livelihoods.
Our lives depend on this ocean. This is our home. This is where we find food. People will start to come and take what belongs to the locals. More people means more trash. This place will no longer feel like home.
Instead, this sleepy coastal community could become one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world.
Britain's Prime Minister has been in China this week talking trade as the UK looks to forge new partnerships for when it leaves the European Union. But China will want to see what a final Brexit deal looks like before making any big commitments. There's a great deal at stake for both countries, as Adrian Brown tells us.
Britain's relationship with China is complicated by history. This is the remains of Beijing's old summer palace, ransacked and looted by British and French troops more than 150 years ago. Chinese people are taught not to forget it.
We should try every way to get these things back from Britain. They are all China's national treasures. They are ours.
Britain should return the things they looted from China because they belong to China.
As she embarks on a 3-day tour of China, Theresa May will have larger concerns than historic grievances. She's here on a mission to increase British trade with China. That need is growing quickly following Britain's decision to leave the European Union.
She should try to convince Chinese leader that she's okay and her government is okay, and she can, provide any effort to have a stable and smooth Brexit. And especially during the Brexit process, there will not be any negative impact on China-Britain relations.
$13 billion worth of trade deals were signed on Wednesday. Significantly, the Prime Minister said, in spite of her earlier reported reservations, Britain would now cooperate with China on its One Belt, One Road initiative, President Xi Jinping's pet project. A joint media conference with China's Premier Li Keqiang was dominated by questions about Britain's future after Brexit.
We're determined to ensure that we get the best Brexit deal for the United Kingdom, and that means it will be a deal that will ensure that we take back control of our money, of our laws and our borders, but we're also able to maintain a good trading relationship with the EU for the future, because that is good for both the United Kingdom and for the European Union.
No matter what changes may happen in the UK's relations with other parts of the world, China will remain committed in its policy of developing friendly relations with the UK, and I have faith in the brighter prospects of China-UK ties.
Theresa May won't be going to Hong Kong, the former British colony returned to China more than 20 years ago, and where calls are growing for her to address concerns about threats to political reform, judicial independence and human rights. May said that a so-called golden era in relations had now intensified. The outcome of her visit will determine by just how much.
Well, joining us now from Hong Kong is Zhang Weishu, a senior economist for Natixis in China. He's also an associate professor at Beijing Normal University. Thanks for being with us. Now, I want to ask you first of all then, how challenging is it going to be for the UK to get a good trade deal with China at this point?
It's going to be, not as easy as people may think about it. Actually, for the UK, after Brexit, it needs to go through a lot of procedure to sign any contracts, any trade deals with the third country. First, it needs to settle its Brexit deal with the European Union. Before that, it cannot even discuss about the multilateral tariff scheme under the WTO framework. So that is most difficult part. After they settle down the Brexit deal with the European Union, it can start to talk about with the WTO on the other issues, and after that, it can start to talk about the bilateral preferential agreement with the third country. So just a timeline for that, and technically, and even for China, if the UK does not settle down its Brexit deal with the European Union, do not want to involve itself too early into the negotiation.
You talked a little bit there about how China's going to be viewing this and how they're going to be closely watching these Brexit negotiations. Talk a little bit more about that and what's in this for China, particularly in its trade relations with the UK. What's at stake for them?
The golden era between UK and China was established while China was still while the UK was still part of the European Union. So China viewed the UK as a breakthrough into the European Union. So that's the main target for China. But following Brexit, the UK was not part of the EU, and any efforts that China can make to get better access to the UK may not offer better access to the EU. So the attraction made from the UK is actually less so for China at the moment. So that's basically the general framework China faces when negotiating with the UK. It's less attractive for the moment.
So let's look at possible scenarios then. If there is what's called a hard Brexit for the UK, where the UK just leaves the European Union without a deal with the EU and presumably reverts to WTO regulations, what's that going to mean for China then?
For China, with the rising, anti-globalization atmosphere everywhere, and China definitely needs friends, and especially from the developed world. And the most likely friend for China at this time is the UK, who is sharing a golden era with China. So both countries have the intrinsic need to move on their, warm relationship with each other. But for China, the realistic point is that it views the EU27, I think, more definite, more important than the UK. It's not only because of the GDP, because of the trade, because the EU is actually the only power in the world can help China to balance a more aggressive United States. In fact, China has started to negotiate with the EU about a bilateral investment agreement from a very early stage, but the progress is, for the moment, slower than expected.
All right, Jianwei Xu, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, scientists in the West have long disputed the therapeutic value of traditional Chinese medicine. But it seems the ancient craft is gaining popularity at home and abroad. It's even been hailed by Xi Jinping's government as the gem of Chinese science. Rob McBride reports from the country's biggest traditional medicine market in the city of Bozhou, where business has never been better.
It's early and the trading hall is packed. Wholesale buyers pick over the samples of the plants, animal parts and minerals that are the basis for traditional Chinese medicine. Orders placed here set prices across China. Zoi Jubin, a trader for 20 years, has only seen those prices go up.
I've seen tremendous changes over time. This ingredient used to sell at $16 for half a kilo. Now it's 30 times that at $475.
Treated as a pseudoscience by many, for its followers, and that includes most older Chinese, it guarantees good health. And increasing popularity abroad is not lost on China's leaders, looking for soft power cultural exports to support China's growing international status. Traditional Chinese medicine has been given the best type of tonic with support from President Xi Jinping, who's described it as the gem of traditional Chinese science. And the Communist Party has been pushing for Chinese medicine to be given equal status with modern Western medicine. But while many doctors agree that traditional medical principles and beliefs have a value, they warn against using ancient remedies that could do more harm than good.
If you're taking the medicines used by the ancient Chinese, they may contain things that are harmful to your health. That's different from traditional medical theories.
Back in the trading halls in Bozhou, such concerns are largely dismissed. Ancient remedies, they say, can exist happily alongside modern medicine.
The two are complementary. You can go to a hospital to get modern treatment, but traditional medicine works well in prevention. This has become a belief for people.
With that belief comes increasing spending power to ensure the market for those potions keeps on booming.
And finally, US crude is back. The International Energy Agency saying earlier this month it expects American production to surpass Saudi Arabia, climbing above 10 million barrels a day in 2018. And that is something we'll be looking at in next week's show. But that is our show for this week. Get in touch with us by tweeting me at Hazim Seeker, and do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or drop us an email Counting the Cost at aljazeera.net is our address. And there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. That's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Hazem Seeker from the whole team here. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.